Uh, Hello and salam alaikum. This is a re-recording of the lesson 7 that we had on Saturday. Due to my recording software not liking uh, the recording, it was not saved, so I had to re-record it again. So we discussed in the lesson two of the most notoriously difficult letters or sounds in Arabic. One of them is more notorious than the other, but we were talking about the letter Ain. And the other is the letter Ghain. It's not found in English, but if you speak another language like French, you are definitely familiar with the sound. It's the letter or the sound Gh. Also, in this class, we're going to discuss other orthographical variations, namely something we call the Alif Khinjariya or dagger Alif, and the Madda, and the Alif Maqsura, and the Ta Marbuta. And we will go through them in details. So let's start with the letter Ain. So the letter Ain is basically, it says that it has no equivalent in English, which is correct. I don't think there are other non-Semitic languages that have that sound in its phonemic arsenal. But to jump into the definition, it's a voiced pharyngeal fricative. And what do we mean by all that? Well, the word voiced, as we have learned before, is a feature that pertains directly to the vibrations of the vocal cords. As in your voice box, if you attempt to pronounce a sound or make a sound, the sound either does vibrate your vocal cords or it does not. So if we look at the sound z, if you put your finger on your voice box, basically the bony part in the middle of your neck, and try to make the sound z, 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 you would notice that the z sound does make your vocal cords vibrate, while the sound s, s, s has no vibration. So we term that the sound z is a voiced sound, and the sound s as an unvoiced or voiceless sound. So, what do we mean by pharyngeal? Pharyngeal, if we look at the diagram or the image here, we notice that there is the pharynx. The pharynx here is basically where your throat is, the fleshy part of your throat. And it says that it's basically a voiced, so there is vibration going in the vocal cords, and the sound is majorly in the pharynx. And the third word was fricative. Fricative is it's from friction basically. So basically there is some friction happening in this area that produces the sound ain. Uh, of course, contrasting with the voiceless pharyngeal fricative, the letter ha. So if you are able to produce the sound ain, put your hand on your voice box and try to say ah, and you can notice the vibration in your voice box. Well, if you say ha, you feel nothing. So we term the letter ha as a voiceless, while the letter ain as a voiced. So the mechanism of creating sound is basically the muscles of the pharynx are tightened and causing the throat to be quite constricted and resulting in a squeezed sound. Now, all this, you might find a lot of analogies on the internet that the letter Ain sounds like someone is choking, which is technically correct because choking, like from an anatomical point of view, is basically the constriction or tightening of the pharynx or the larynx by an object or internally as in the certain cases of allergies. Um, so, but how do we train our pharyngeal muscles to constrict? And this is where training and imitation actually happens. Uh, Basically, I cannot give you a bicycle if you don't know how to ride a bicycle. I cannot just give you a bicycle and tell you like, yo, go for it, just ride it. You can't. You have to learn how to ride it. And once you learn it, it becomes second nature to you. You just never forget. It's just, it's now part of you. Same thing with speaking. Speaking is part of you, as in you learn that since childhood, and you develop the required organs of speech that allows you to speak. And of course, that is different from every language. Some languages have sounds, others do not. And your organs of speech are trained to specific sounds in specific languages. But now in Arabic, you're learning a new sound. So you have to kind of train yourself. The one trick that we've discussed in the class when we were actually in the Discord is that basically you put your hand on your Adam's apple, and if you don't know where the Adam's apple is, basically is the most pointy part of in the middle of your lung of your neck, and if you slide basically from your Adam's apple here, and if you slide up, you'd find like a little bit of a fleshy part. And if you kind of do that on the both sides in the fleshy part and say the letter ha or ha, but you prolong it, so it's like ha. And while saying it, you squeeze. You kind of push upwards a little bit, forcing your pharynx to be tighter, to squeeze a little bit more. So if I'm doing it, my tongue or my throat is completely relaxed. I'm not doing anything, but I'm just squeezing. So ha ha. You notice that the sound quality has changed from ha to ha or something close to it, and that's how you basically build that sound. And another analogy for it is like someone who's retching, someone is like about to throw up. And that's correct because in if you like if someone is retching, all the muscles of the pharynx are constricted and you make the sound uh, uh, uh. So this is what we mean by constriction or squeezing your throat muscles. The constriction of the pharynx is the same as found in ha, but with the letter ayn there is not so much friction noise. The voicing continue throughout. So what this means is that in the letter ha and ayn there is both constriction of the sound, but in the letter ha the constriction aims to increase the friction of the air that is going through the pharynx, while the letter ayn the friction is a bit less and the most of the sound happens here, as in your vocal cords, not in your pharynx. So we will listen to the letter Ain more, and in the next slide. But now we'll jump to how to write the letter Ain. The letter Ain basically it resembles Jim and Ha in the fact that it has a belly under, but the head of it is different, as in it's like a small. It resembles the Hamza a little bit. So what we do is like this. This is the standalone form of the letter Ain. Of course, the letter Ain is a connector letter, which takes the following form, as we've learned before, as it has the independent form, the one joined by a previous letter, the one joined by a following letter, and joined on both sides. So if we would look at the independent letter, I would just say, I would write it like this. And how would I pronounce this? It's the ba has no fatha, so it's but it's followed by an alif here, so it is basically a long vowel, fatha on the ba, so it's ba'a, ba'a, ba'a. And the one that is joined by something before it is basically the head of the ayn would just close. And I would write it yabi', yabi'. There's a fatha on the ya. There's nothing on the b, but it's followed by a ya, so we know it's basically it's a long vowel kasra. And the ayn has a dhamma, so it's yabi'u, yabi'u, yabi'u. The third uh, form is basically joined by a following letter. So it's basically either word initial or followed by a non-connector, like dal or ra. So how would I write it? I would just open the head of the ayn without the belly. So it's, you know, it's alam, alamun, alamun. A with a long vowel al fatha, and the lam has a fatha, and tanween dhamma. So it's alamun. The joint on both sides, basically, again, the story happens where the ayn closes, so I would write it like this. But how I would differentiate it from the letter fa earlier is that I would basically color, oops, color or fill the circle with something. Because if I write it like this, people might actually think it's fa. So I would write this as ba'atha, ba'atha as either he sent or he resurrected. So let's just read again. So here we would go A1, it's al, al. Number two is na'lun, na'lun. Number three is there's a shadda on the ayn, so I have to double the sound. I have to kind of stress it. لعب, لعب, لعب. How would I pronounce it if there was no shadda? So it's, this is not a kaf, this is a fatha. لعب, لعب, but لعب, 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 and لعب. There is number 4 is شعبا, 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 شعبا. And there's a trap that actually happens with a trap that actually is very common with the letter Ain, as some people treat it as a stop. So they would go like sha'ban, sha'ban, which is difficult, which is wrong, and the Ain is basically a continuous letter. So it's sha'ban, sha'ban. And number 5 is يلعب, يلعب, يلعب. B1 is اجتماع, اجتماع. Remember, this is pronounced as Hamza, and we will get to it the next question, the next lesson. اجتماع, اجتماع. There's a sukun here. This one is again a geminated or doubled ayn, so it's صعب, صعب, صعب. He made things difficult, or he made things difficult for someone. So this one is أعجب, أعجب, أعجب. Here انعقد, انعقد, انعقد. This one is تابع, تابع, تابع. Row C is موعد, موعد, موعد. C2 is actually a very important preposition you'll have to learn because it means with. I am with someone. مع, مع, مع. Number 3 is ينعم, ينعم, ينعم. Number 4 is استمع, استمع. Number 5 is عرب, 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 عرب. Row D is سعر, سعر, سعر. And there is تعليم, تعليم, تعليم. Why? There is a kasra on the lam, but it's not written there, of course, but we know it because of the ya after, so it's a long vowel E sound. رجع, رجع. And there's one is لعن, لعن. The final one is علم, علم, علم. عامي, سعل, سعل. راع, نفع, نبع, نبع. So let's jump to the letter Ghain. The letter Ghain is, when we define it, it's a voiced velar fricative. The like kha with the addition of voicing. Again, voicing is vibration of the vocal cords, and velar. What does velar mean? Velar, that means it's produced in this area. Because if we zoom in, we say that's the palatine velum. So it's basically the fleshy part of your palate, soft palate, at the back of your mouth, where your uvula is, the little dangly thing at the back of your mouth. It's called the uvula. Velar fricative. Fricative, of course, it indicates there's friction, like the letter kha. Ghain also occurs in the same place. It has friction, but there is, in contrast to the letter kha, there is voicing with the letter ghain. Is one approach is to say, basically say you know, if you read what it says, we're prolonging the j, then withdrawing the back of your tongue from the velum slightly. So what I'm doing is I'm basically like intentionally pushing my tongue backwards, as trying to shove it back at the back of my mouth, and that will produce the friction needed to make the sound r. Probably the simplest way to achieve the gha sound is to gargle water, or with water or without it. When you gargle water, it's like and the name for gargling in Arabic is actually gharghara. So let's hear the different sound between ghain and kha. Here we'd say khal and ghal, khilaf, غلاف, خير, غير, خرخرة, غرغرة, تخير, تغير. Again, تخير, تغير, ساخ, ساغ, رخو, رغو. We'll jump on how to write it. It's the letter Ghain, also it's a non-connector, and it's very similar to letter Ain, but there's a dot on top. It also has four forms: the independent, joined by something before it, joined by something after it, and joined on both sides. How would I write it and read it? So it's the Ghain, basically it's Ain with a dot, and I would read this as فارغ, 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 because there's a Dhamma on the Ghain. فارغ. Next one is basically we close the head of the ayn or the ghain, and basically you can fill it or not. It depends, all up to you. صائغ, صائغ, and the ghain also like the ayn, but the ayn head with a dot on top, so it's غال, غال. The joint on both sides, basically you have to kind of color it in so it's not mistaken with the fa. Of course, people may have asked, how do I differentiate this between fa or ghain and meme? Meme is usually something you write underneath, not on top. Not like basically you have to dip down. The circle is lower, is at the bottom of it, not on top, not above. So Baghdad, Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. So the reading, the A1 is غال, لغة, 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 بغداد, بغداد, فارغ, فارغ, صائغ, صائغ. B1 is غناء, غناء. Number 2 is المغني, المغني. غناء, غدا, tomorrow. غالب, C. بلغ, مغلوب. غير, غلاب, غلاب. غرب, غرب. So we'll jump to Alif Dagger Alif or Alif Khanjariya. Basically, Alif Khanjariya is an orthographical convention. As in very few common words, the long vowel a is represented by something that is not the letter a or the letter alif, but with a smaller one written like this. If I zoom in, you can see it's basically a little tiny alif, which resembles a dagger to the alif that is basically a sword, written over the consonant. Now, why? This is because convention. It was written like ages ago and we just kept it. We never changed it. And the sign is a short vertical stroke with the appearance of a small alif called the dagger alif or alif khinjariya. The few common words is basically one of the most commonly used as well. So hada, if I look at hada, and if I try to transliterate it as I pronounce it in English, I would actually write it like this: ha, 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 the. So if I were to write the transliteration as is in Arabic, I have to go like this: ha, hada. But this way is considered wrong. How we do it is basically we write it like this and put a small dagger on the ha. Unfortunately, there is basically this symbol would not be written in unvoweled text, but usually there are very common words that you could just learn them as is. You can just like remember them as is. The other word is ذلك. If I would to kind of transliterate it as I pronounce it, I would have to write it like this: ذلك, because there's a fatha and it's a long vowel, so it's ذلك. But of course, this is wrong. This one is very common, and you've seen it. If you actually write it on your keyboard, the keyboard automatically kind of adds it. So Allah, so if I would write it as is, like if you I would translate it Allah, Allah, so I'd have to write it like this, which is completely wrong. No one writes it like that. It has to be written like this with a dagger alif and shadda on the lam. Same thing, but this one is when connected by a prefixed like preposition lam, harf al jar. But this is an advanced rule for now. And we pronounce this lillah, lillah. This is all about dagger alif. There's nothing more about it. There's nothing special. It's just something you have to keep in mind because you might actually read it and question why is it written this way. But to just keep you aware. So we'll jump to something else. We call it madda. Madda is basically the scenario where there's a hamza that has a long vowel alif, a long vowel fatha, sorry, strictly long vowel fatha, because this is how logically it should be written. But in Arabic, they were like, nah, we're not going to do this. We're going to basically remove this whole construct and just write an alif with like a kind of like a tilde sign on top. Not tilde, but like basically a stroke, a quotation stroke, I guess. And it says here the sequence of hamza followed by a long vowel or hamza, long vowel alif or fatha, represented by the sign madda, which is the sign here you see here. In most positions in the word, the sequence is written over an alif. So basically, the alif bears uh, the uh, the madda sign, and we can find it in few words also, as in the word athar. If I would pronounce the word athar, you can notice by the sound or how I pronounce it. It's like athar, athar. There's a glottal stop, which is the hamza, and then there's a sound. So athar means ruins or basically like artifacts. Uh, and one major word that also you'll find is Al-Qur'an. Al-Qur'an. If I want to break it down, you'd find it like this. Actually, in the Quranic orthography, you might actually find words written like this too. But a Quranic orthography is something we cannot kind of discuss. It is as is. We just don't discuss it. It's written for a reason. We don't know. Here is amana. Amana. So I would write it like this. Amana. Right? But this is wrong, and we'd have to write it like this. Alaf. Same thing. Alaf. Thousands. It means thousands. Um, alaf, but of course, this is a wrong way of writing it. However, if we find a hamza that has dhamma or kasra, basically this is dhamma and this is kasra, or a long vowel, yeah, the rules we have learned before are applied in the following examples, and we can all refer to that, I think, in the last week's lecture, where we discussed both the middle hamza and the final hamza, if it comes at the end of the word or at the middle of it. So here we would see su'al written on a seat waw. He would see the hamza written on a ya seat. And here we would see the hamza written on a ya seat as well because of the vowel before it. Kasra, kasra, and the dhamma determines the seat. Alif maqsura. Alif maqsura is basically just another variation of the shape of alif. Alif maqsura here is basically a considerable amount of words, unfortunately. A final, and I would like to emphasize the fact that it's final. So it never happens in the middle of the word or in the beginning of the word. It's always a final thing. The final long vowel a is represented not by the usual alif, by the special letter like that looks like yeah but without dots, called alif maqsura, or basically the shortened alif. If we look here, I would read this as bara, bara, and it bears the same function as the long alif, as it's an indicator for a long vowel. So bara, bana, tawa, and this is a noun. These are all three verbs, and this is a final noun, which is basically a snake, or we call it af'a, af'a, af'a. Now, the reason is why do we use this instead of the alif? It's basically due to the nature of the verb root to differentiate certain verbs that sound the same, but in writing they would mean different things. But in writing they would be written differently, sorry, just to differentiate that these verbs come from two different roots. And basically, this is a bit of an advanced rule. They tell you to know if to write a verb with an alif or an alif maqsura is to basically conjugate it for the imperfect verb. And if it's a waw, you'd write it with an alif. If it's a ya, you would write it with an alif maqsura. But what really matters to us here is that 2 points I would like to discuss is 2 points maybe about particularly noted about the alif maqsura is the long vowel sound is exactly the same, nothing is different, represented by the regular alif. The alif maqsura occurs only last in a word, so it can never be can never be a medial word or like in the middle or something. No, it's always final. But if a suffix is added to such word, the alif maqsura will regain the normal alif as seen here. You've seen that verb here? If we add something to it, if we conjugate it or we add a direct object suffix, this ha is basically considered it signifies a direct object, we would write it as a straight alif, basically a full form alif, and we pronounce it as barahu, barahu. Here we would write it as banahu. Here we would write it as tawahu. He fold it basically, or he built it. He sharpened it. Um, the alif maqsura is, I think, we're done with it. If there are any questions, you can always find me in the server. Now we're going to discuss the meat of the lesson, which is the ta marbuta, which is basically what we call the tied ta. Tied ta is basically a normal ta that we tied the the both edges together and it became a circle with two dots, and not to be confused with the letter ha, which has no dots. The ta marbuta. Oh my god. The ta marbuta is basically has a double function, which is something that would make your life easier as a learner. Phonologically, it represents the sound t like the letter ta. Otherwise, it won't be called ta marbuta. It would be called something else. It represents the letter ta, but a different shape or different form. Grammatically, it usually indicates feminine gender in the noun or adjective in which it appears. Now, that's not like a complete absolute rule. I would say 99% of the nouns that have ta marbuta at the end are usually feminine, as we see here. Uh, ma, malikatun, malikatun. Notice the t sound. Malikatun. It's like it's a normal t, but kind of folded together. طالبة طالبة. This is a queen, basically. And this is a student, but I would put feminine in parentheses as in it's basically like a female student. فتاة, basically a young girl. A young girl. So there are more points to discuss about the Latai ta. One, it occurs only as the last consonant of a word. If a suffix adds more letters to the word, the taita will open up and become normal. So if we say that the occurs only as a last consonant, it has two cases of writing. If it's a standalone, it would be a circle with two dots. If it's not, then it will be like ha with two dots on top. So let's see how this phenomena happens when something is added to it. It's like the same alif, the same concept with alif maqsura, where basically the alif regains the normal shape. Here, look at the word malikatun. If I add this suffix here, the ta has opened up and became like a normal ta, but it's joined on both ends. So basically, malikatuhum, their queen. Same thing if we're going to apply this to taliba. So if I write taliba, and I conjugate it for طالبتهم. Oops, sorry. طالبتهم. Notice there's a ta here. And same thing with fata. If I'm going to write fata, it would be like fatatuhum. Fatatuhum, their girl. Again, This is one of the things that might actually help you read unvoweled text, but it says that it's always preceded by a fatha, and in much smaller number of words by the long vowel ah. And let's look at our examples. There is a fatha here, there is a fatha here, and there is a long vowel fatha here. Fata, taliba, malika. So whenever you see a ta marbuta, make sure that or be rest assured that the letter before it has a fatha as a vowel. The alif, which is normally written after accusative nunation, tanween fatha, double fatha, is not written after the ta marbuta. So if we remember tanween, if I write the word kitab and I put it in accusative tanween, so it's kitaban, I have to write an alif. If I write the word talib, or malik, Malik is basically the king. This is queen, right? Malikatan. Malika is queen, but Malik is king. If I were to write it as tanween, I would write it like this: Malikan. But the shape would be different. Anyway, uh, oops. Yeah. So in Malikatan with ta marbuta, no alif for tanween is needed. Now the pausal form. The pausal form is basically the form or the word pronunciation where it comes a final in the end of your speech, as if you're stopping after a full stop or a question mark. The sound changes to h basically. So it'd be like instead of saying malikatan, I would say malika, malika. Let's read. So A1 is muddatun, muddatun, jumlatan, sayyidatu, مكتبة مكتبة مشهورة 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 طالبة معلمة معلمة آنسة آنسة جامعة زائرة. So, this is a quick